Excuse me?
Are you asking me what I think?
No, what stops it being done in this country?
That's what I think.
Why shouldn't it be?
Okay, I've got your point.
Why shouldn't we have union representation?
Yes. Any more? I might as well take 52 in
Back.
each one. If there are any more, I'll try and answer. There might be some that, you know, disagree with what I've said. By all means, raise it. Or any point of clarification, raise it. If not, I'll deal with this question. Yeah? Co-determination. I know it very well. It was established by a man called Ernest Bevan, the British Foreign Secretary, in the 1945-51 government.
Yeah,
Of course, he died in office.
That's what I thought.
I wrote a pamphlet called The Myth of Workers' Control. You won't find that on your Google. For some reason, they don't publish the pamphlets I've written or the book that I've written, Century of Struggle, but there you are. But The Myth of Workers' Control is certainly a pamphlet that got widespread support and sold in, well, literally thousands. I condemned it. Co-determination is the first step towards collaboration. Once you start sitting on boards of directors, you become part of them. I can tell you. You, as a trade unionist, you should be sitting in a position where you represent workers in negotiation with employers. If in my way, of course, we would have a nationalised industry, and you would have, on the other side, a trade union arguing the case. The experience that I had within the coal industry, and I know that Paul had, was one called consultation machinery. It worked extremely well for the National Coal Board. They could consult all day, and at the end of the day, their view, like Brian Clough used to say, determine what was going to happen. The problem was that you had a pit closure program, or a closure or a redundancy program, which you could challenge. And you could take it all the way to the top. And I condemned it. Because at the end of the process, even if an independent judge agreed with our case that the colliery should be kept open and the workers should be kept employed, they could ignore it. Now, that's no control at all. Co-determination is even worse. People who sit on boards of directors are part and parcel of an establishment. And I tell you what happens in, for example, pension schemes. Pension schemes, I'm talking about the occupational pension schemes, are operated by and large by the sponsoring employer. And no matter how you argue the case, at the end of the day, you've got to get the agreement of the sponsoring employer. So if the trustees take one view and the sponsoring employer takes another, you're in a deadlock situation. That's bad enough, but on the trustee body, they've got 50% at least of the trustees. And we've been through courts with this, and we know from experience that co-determination is a disaster. It may be interesting to know that co-determination in Germany is now being opposed by the trade unions. They've recognised at long last that all it does is make them into collaborationists, and instead of representing their workers, they're actually going along with the management's views. One final point of personal experience. When I was 21, for some unknown reason, the miners at my pit, there were 3,000 of them, elected me as an official. I was the youngest in Yorkshire. And lo and behold, I was also elected on an area basis to this Area Consultative Committee. And I went along to this. I'd never been to one before. And the second item on the agenda was absenteeism. and they were discussing when they should dismiss a person for absenteeism. And of course, my political instincts came into play. And I said, if a person is off work and is certified by a doctor as unfit for work, he should never be dismissed, or she should never be dismissed. We had trade union representatives on that body. I was the newcomer who said, "Hey lad," he says, "some of these blokes aren't telling the truth, I knows, and we've got to take a stand if they're off for 6 weeks and a more. And if it comes to that, we've got to ensure that we do something, like give them a warning, then we dismiss them." And there was one case at a colliery in West Yorkshire, and they agreed with one vote against that this bloke was given a final chance. This was on a Thursday. He either started work on the following Monday or he would be dismissed. The lad had a family to look after. He wasn't fit for work. And he went to work at 6 o'clock in the morning, and at 7:45 he was dead. And at the next area consultative committee, there were a few downcast faces. And I just said this: I hope this represents a lesson, that when you set yourself up as God, you may get it wrong. If a man is off work with a doctor's certificate that says he's unfit for work, it should be a binding rule that he is. And it's not a matter for us to start to interfere with it. I'm very pleased that I was taught by one of the best in the world to stand my ground on that. That was my dad. I carried out that wish. I'm pleased I did. And it put me against co-determination for life.
I mean, there's a phrase, isn't there? You know, you've got to be careful what you wish for. And Arthur will probably briefly allude to the case of a certain gentleman who was a guest of ours at the NUM conference at Tenby a few years ago, one Cyril Ramaphosa, who was involved in the National Union of Mine Workers South Africa and has ended up on the board of, I think, various companies and ordered black workers to be fired upon, didn't he, and all this type of thing, you know.
Cyril Ramaphosa is currently Vice President of South Africa. Cyril Ramaphosa, when I first met him in 1982, had just been elected National President of the NUM. And I wrote the South African NUM Constitution, based primarily on the National Union of Mine Workers Constitution in Britain. He and I remained what I thought were close friends. He stayed with me both in London and he stayed with me in Yorkshire, at my home. As did the Vice President, and as did the organiser, and as did the President. All four of them are now members of the boards of Anglo-American, Lonrho, and other international companies, and all four of them are multi-millionaires. In Cyril Ramaphosa's case, he's a multi-billionaire. If you told me then what would happen now, I wouldn't have believed you. But here he is as Vice President of South Africa, having come from being General Secretary of the National Union of Mine Workers to a position like that. But the worst feature of his tenure throughout that period was that he was a member of Lonrho when they turned out the troops and shot down strikers at Lonrho in what is now known as a massacre of workers who were only demonstrating their right for a better wage and better conditions. For that, I'll never forgive him. I can't. That was a step too many. Anything else, if he wanted to go another direction politically, that was a matter for him. If he thought as General Secretary of the ANC, which he became, that he wanted to be Vice President of South Africa and is going to be apparently the next President of South Africa, so be it. I don't hold that against him. But I do hold it against him that he advised people to cross the picket lines, and he also advised people to fire on striking miners. Mind you, that's not much different. You know, don't forget Ken Livingstone in London advised workers to cross the picket lines when the railway workers were on strike. And we've got a litany of trade union leaders who've been not dissimilar positions. You've only got to look at 1984 and what the power workers did and what they didn't do during that period. There were some magnificent exceptions in the trade union movement, both in this country and worldwide. But we should never forget that until and unless we can get a socialist system of society and public and common ownership, we will never eliminate the fact that while ever we've got private companies to deal with and you've got a trade union, the two are always on opposite sides. And if you're on opposite sides, then, you know, you fight if you're necessary for that in which you believe. I'll tell you one little story surprised me between the two sides. In Yorkshire, we decided that there would be a development of a new coalfield called Selby. That coalfield, by the way, was earmarked for 150 to 200 years. It went into production in 1981-2. So it's got 100 to 200 years life. It closed in 1985, 6, 7 and 8. But during the course of that development, the workers on the site are not miners, they're construction workers. With 4,000 construction workers. The first thing I did was insist that they all belong to the National Union of Mine Workers, although they could still retain their membership of whatever union they were in. Not one person objected. And then there was a dispute. The only dispute I could remember. And they were fighting to have what was called a guaranteed wage in the event that they were unable to work because of, say, rainy conditions or whatever. Don't forget they were working on the surface to develop the mining industry. And they were all there out. And I went down with Owen Briscoe, the General Secretary of Yorkshire. And I've always had a reputation that if we want an increase of £10, it's £10. I don't want to go in for £15 and then come out with 8 and say we've done a victory. If it's worth it, we fight for it. There's too much of this bargaining, so-called, that doesn't fit with my principles. And I went and I addressed this field full, thousands of members, all construction workers. I said, now I want you to tell me, and I don't want any nonsense, I'm going to go in to negotiate with these owners I've never met. Tell me how much you're arguing for. They said, well, you know, we'd like a lot, but we'll settle if we can get £20 a day. At that time, it's a lot of money. £20 a day, then we'll settle. So I said, fine, I know where I am. I said, I will test the water and see what happens. I went up to a place called Montfryston, where there's a big hole. I've never seen as many Rolls Royces in my life, with all these companies. But Calpine's the lot. And I walked into this room, and they were sitting around a table with cigars, half of them, half for the length of this bloody room. And this chap who was in the chair said, Mr. Scargill, we have a problem. I thought, we? He said, can we not settle this dispute? Now, don't forget, I've been used to negotiating with the National Coal Board. And when you first put a claim in, it went on for at least 3 bloody months before you got to a stage where you were clashing. So I said, look, I don't want to come here and waste your time or waste mine. And I've told the men down there that I'm going to come in here and I'm going to ask you to pay them the figure that I know is right. and I'm not going to go one penny below it. I says, if you are prepared to pay these men a £20 guarantee, I says, we settle it. Now I'm expecting an adjournment for a week or a month or whatever. He said, just one moment, Mr. Scargill. He said, can you get the workers back to work by 12 midday? I said, on what grounds? He says, we'll pay the full amount. I said, yes. I went back to Downing Field. They were carrying me shoulder high. They all went back to work. We got in the car coming home, and Briscoe says, what's wrong with you? You ain't spoken a word. I said, well, hell, if I'd have known, I'd have asked for bloody 30. But it demonstrated that they were in trouble. And all too often, we don't realise the power of a united movement.
Thank you very much for attending. Don't be afraid to put it out amongst social media and stuff like that, if that's